Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of Straight Talk Whiskey. I'm Nick here with you as always, and thanks for joining us for episode number 131. So today what we have going on is George Dickel Number 12, Old Tennessee Whiskey. So, in looking around at the store, just looking for something, that could take the place of like a little daily drinkers, a little something you'd have after dinner. And so typically that's going to be something that's a little less expensive. And because I'm usually in the Jack Daniel's section of the liquor store, if I'm going to go Tennessee whiskey, I figured I would go with something a little bit different. Now, of course, you know that we've done the Tabasco finish from George Dickel, but today we've got what used to be referred to as the Superior or Tan label, number 12 from Dickel, as opposed to their number 8 black label, is coming in at a nice 45% ABV, so 90 proof. What else do we have? The one curious thing on here is that if you go and look up sort of the history of the distillery, you might be confused a little bit that it was born 40 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, but actually, when you look at the bottle, you'll see that you've got 1870 on there, and for those of you who are even relatively okay or alive when it comes to math, will know that though doesn't add up. But what that refers to is the birth of George Dickel, which is interesting. I don't know that we really care about that, but anyway, 1870 is when they started this journey to create the best Tennessee whiskey around. You'll also notice that in spelling of whiskey, we don't have the E there because George Dickel initially wanted to go along with the Scottish tradition of not including the E in whiskey on the label. So, handcrafted small batch, you can see that on there. You gotta take a pause when you see that sort of thing. You don't know exactly, what that means, what's handcrafted small batch. I'm sure they use plenty of automation in machines there at the Cascade Hollow Distillery there in Tennessee, in Tullahoma, Tennessee. It's got a nice sounding name, at least. But the bottle is just interesting because a lot of whiskeys, I hate to say that this is probably lower on the shelf in terms of most liquor stores selling this, but most aren't going to have this much information on the bottle. Now, whether that is actual information about what's in there, or it's just sort of to get you hyped up about George Dickel in general, or whatever whiskey that you're looking at purchasing, is yet to be determined. But it does claim, it's a superior recipe. We've got handcrafted small batch. We've got the nice saying, come for the moonlight, stay for the whiskey. George would want you to. That has to do with their aging process, typically happening in the charcoal filtration. That whole process of taking place in the winter as opposed to the summer, because it supposedly, in George Dickel's opinion, creates a more soft and mellow whiskey. Again, not really sure about that claim, but maybe there's some truth to it. And then the interesting thing that I found on the back of here, which you probably can't see with the camera being so far away, is that for the first time I've ever seen on a bottle, there is a, shall we say, quote-unquote, nutrition label, where we have the serving facts. The serving size is 1.5 fluid ounces, which you may know if you're a bartender. And then servings per container, 17. I've never before in my 30 years of living seen that on a bottle of whiskey. And you've got calories. 109 calories. Again, I have never seen that in my life. 0 carbs, 0 fat, 0 protein. The calories got to come from somewhere. So, figure out what that is. But anyway, I just think that is interesting. Probably, I don't know if it's the most interesting whiskey I've ever had, but it's definitely the most interesting whiskey bottle in terms of labeling that I've ever seen. So anyway, let's get into the whiskey itself. The old number 12 has got a really leaning towards the gold flake yellowish color when it comes to the amber coppery tone that we know with some bourbons. Obviously, this isn't a bourbon, even though technically it probably would qualify if it weren't made in Tennessee. Anyway, the nose. Now there's some subtle fruit going on, some orchard fruit, a little bit of apple, even some overly ripe grapes going on, a little bit of red wine. And I will say that you can tell that I've had a little bit of this because I needed to in order to get to this flavor and nosing profile. Because when I first smelt this, I thought there was something horribly wrong with it. It smelled astringent, medicinal, and not in a good way that you might get with a really heavily peated Scotch or something from Islay. It was not good. It smelled of wet cardboard and was very unpleasant, and I thought that we were going to have a problem in reviewing this in terms of it just being nasty, but it's not the case. It has evolved a little bit. It has gotten a little mixed with oxygen in there. It seems to have mellowed out and revealed some of its true flavors, or true essences, if you will. So anyway, let's go in for a taste. Now, the first thing that you get is a nice little vanilla, a little bit of it, that coats sort of the center of the tongue. And then you've got a nice, peppery, but very, very corn forward sort of finish or mouthfeel that it's prevalent in terms of the whole experience. It sort of coats the edge of the tongue. And I would say that it dominates the entire palate. As I've gone back and tasted it a little bit further, I've known that to be true as well. So when we look at the mash bill, and it's not on the bottle, but if you go online to Dickel's website, you can get this information. It's 84% corn, 8% rye, and the other 8% is malted barley. So that corn is definitely a big powerhouse in this whiskey, and it definitely is what comes through. I would say that's probably the key difference that you'd find between Dickel and Jack Daniel's, is sort of the mash bill and what comes up in terms of the flavor profile. Luckily, some of the cardboard taste that I got when I initially opened this bottle has gone away, but I think it was that corn flavor and the corn forward notes that really had to open up and let breathe and mix in a little bit, because I'm sure that's what was making this taste and smell a little bit odd, as well as the pairing of the overly ripe grapes. We know how that can sometimes get really sort of in your face and pungent and sort of make you twist your nose up and make some kind of awkward looks. But anyway, overall, not too terrible. If I was going to compare this with, God, I guess we'd have to say Gentleman Jack in terms of going up a step above the black label, because they both have black labels between 7 and 8, really, when you look at JD versus Dickel. I would say that the Jack would win out for me, but that's just a personal preference. You may like this really corn forward expression, if you will, but I've also had some very corn forward whiskeys that I feel were a little bit more interesting. Definitely Hudson has some whiskeys that were probably a little bit more in my ballpark in terms of flavors that I'm looking for with a corn whiskey, but I don't know. So I guess the last question to answer before we end this review is, does it live up to the ability to be a daily drinker or something after dinner sort of thing? I don't really know. I don't think it'd be something that I would go to if I were looking for specifically a Tennessee whiskey. Again, I would just go with Gentleman Jack. I feel like it's also got a little bit more bearing and this, quintessential Tennessee whiskey factor. If someone says, what's your favorite Tennessee whiskey, you're not probably going to jump off unless you work at Dickel or have a really strong connection with this whiskey going to say that. You'll typically go with Jack Daniels because that's even whiskey-wise, people, that's their go-to in terms of American whiskeys. So it just has a lot more force behind it. So anyway, I think that is it for this episode. There's not much else that I or the label can tell you, but I would appreciate it if you let me know what you think about this whiskey if you've had it. Also, if you've had number 8, because I haven't had that before, and I don't think that I'm going to go down to that to see if there's something that's a little bit more palatable for me. So let me know if this is something that is interesting to you, something that you like, something that you'd use for a daily drinker, or what else you might use. For instance, I might offer up to get Old Granddad. Don't actually go grab your Old Granddad, just get the whiskey. It's probably on the bottom shelf, but it's the most underrated American whiskey ever. You will not change my mind. That's just the way it is. But good for you. Now that you know, you can go stock up on bottles of that. But anyway, if you're going to drink responsibly, and we will see you next time.